Two memos released by Republicans on Capitol Hill, one from the House Intelligence Committee, another from the Senate Judiciary Committee, are rocking Washington. Do the once classified memos show collusion at the highest levels of the government against the Trump presidential campaign and now President Trump? Well, joining us is David Cay Johnston. He's author of the book, It's Even Worse Than You Think: What the Trump Administration is Doing to America. And Jordan Sekulow is here from the American Center for Law and Justice. Let's start with David. David, you seem to think those memos are politics, not a real effort to expose political bias at the FBI and Justice Departments. So why, from your perspective, what's going on?
Well, this memo, as pointed out by a former CIA director, is a cherry-picked memo that the Democrats have said is completely misleading. Let's be clear about what was going on here. Donald Trump has been receiving money from Russians under very unusual circumstances that I write about in this book and in my prior book, The Making of Donald Trump, since 1983. And it was foreign governments, the Australians, the Dutch, and the English, who came to American counterintelligence and said, there appears to be a significant problem with contacts between people in the Trump campaign and the Russian government. I find it astonishing that the party of law and order, and I'm a registered Republican, is doing these things that tend to discredit the FBI without instead looking at what are the facts and let's have public hearings the way we did, for instance, during Watergate.
Jordan, is this the cherry picking of information for political purposes and the discrediting of the FBI, or has the FBI discredited itself?
I think in a number of ways, the FBI leadership from the Obama administration that carried over into some of the Trump administration and the deputies, the top Washington folks, Gary, have discredited themselves. We're not talking about the entire FBI, the field offices, the agents who are out there risking their lives every single day. We're talking about Washington, D.C., FBI headquarters, if you will, the 7th floor of the FBI, the top of the top. And those officials, what we see from these memos, and it's not being disputed by the other side, was that a political campaign's paid-for opposition research was the basis of a FISA warrant and the basis of the evidence.
Mr. Johnston, you're an investigative journalist, so am I. And when I look at these memos, I see a law firm and company hired by the Clinton campaign to do opposition research against Trump. And then that research, without validation, was used by the FBI to spy on at least one American. Doesn't that bother you?
No, because what you said, if what you said was accurate, then I would say, yes, I'm very concerned. The original hiring of Fusion GPS, which is run by a former Wall Street Journal investigative reporter, was done by the Washington Free Beacon, which I think you and I would agree is a conservative Washington publication. Only later did a Democratic law firm then hire Fusion GPS. But what started the investigation, and it's clear from the memo that this is the case, was the tip from Australian diplomatic services who had had a conversation in which one of the Trump people disclosed involvement with Russians. And this confirms the reporting in the New York Times about what happened here.
Jordan, back to you. Did the House Intelligence Committee 4-page memo accurately detail what was in the more lengthy FISA document?
Well, I think what we will know is because we saw, unlike with the Republican memo, where it was a completely partisan vote in the House Intelligence Committee, every Republican, Gary, voted okay to release the Democrat memo that's now at the White House for a review. And what the White House has said is it's a more difficult memo to release publicly because it has more of the procedures and the methods that are classified that they don't want to release, that should not be released publicly, but that they are still going through that process. So there was not a single Republican voted against letting that memo go. So I think what we know is that the FBI tried to downplay through the Department of Justice when they filed their FISA request on Carter Page, this former Trump campaign official, that they tried to downplay through a footnote that this came from people who may be politically opposed. Let's not forget all of the unmasking that was requested by the Obama administration. I don't think for a minute any of this is unrelated, and it's all just kind of putting this giant puzzle together And they're doing everything they can, Washington, to make this difficult for people. And so when a 3.5-page memo comes out that lays it out very clearly, they want to make it, they want to discredit that as much as possible, because it becomes all too clear to the American people what was going on here. And it was wrong. And we need to restore the credibility of the FBI. We want the FBI to have credibility. We're not trying to take down the FBI. We want the FBI to have credibility as a nation's top law enforcement agency and focused on national security and fighting terrorism.
Yeah, I think I've heard some people say, maybe even your dad, that it's not about destroying the FBI, it's about saving it from corruption. So how about
That's exactly right.
How about some transparency here? Should we see the FISA warrant documents and a transcript of the arguments that were made to gain its approval?
You know, I think that will be up to, again, the Department of Justice and working with the new FBI, so there's new leadership there, and Congress working together. They could ultimately release that, depending on, again, is it releasable in the sense that could you take out the information that isn't appropriate?
Things that to you and me might appear to be insignificant. And I say this as someone who's exposed spies and foreign agents as a reporter. Things that to you and me may appear to be absolutely plain vanilla can be of enormous intelligence use to hostile governments, particularly the Kremlin. And let's keep in mind that the Kremlin had its emissary send an email in June of 2016 to Don Trump Jr. that in its language made it clear that the Russians were already interfering in the election. It said, as part of Russia and its government's support for your campaign, if you're running for president, or your father is, and you get a foreign government offering help, it's a crime to accept such help, and there is only one rightful thing to do. You pick up the phone, you call the FBI, and you say, I need to speak to someone in counterintelligence. Donald Trump Jr. lied about this memo, these emails, for a year. The White House has made 6 statements since then, which are internally inconsistent and contain what we now know to be a number of lies.
I'm not excusing lies, but it seems like there have been lies on the other side, on the part of the Democrats as well. Weren't there connections with the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian pro-Russian Ukrainians?
Yes, and the world is a very complicated place, but these are not moral equivalents.
In the Democrats' situation, they were paying Christopher Steele to go to Russia to get dirt from Russians. I mean, so in a sense, they're working with Russians right there. And that's one thing to judge politically whether you like that or not. It's another thing to say it's illegal. And so, again, I think you talk about the moral equivalency. That's kind of up to the American people to decide whether they like that or not with their politicians. But if you actually go, I'm an attorney, and you go to law, the reason why no one really talks about collusion anymore is because there is no law against it, like that or not. So they move on to other issues. And again, I think what those other issues really are is about the government in Washington, D.C. And this includes Republicans and Democrats, by the way. But inside the agencies like the FBI, who want to protect their interest over the interests of the American people and the policies that the elected commander-in-chief and elected officials in our country who oversee the executive branch want to put in place.
David, what do you think should be done now? Another special prosecutor to look into these allegations? Maybe a commission against government corruption?
Well, I think what we should do is allow the special prosecutor to finish his work, and let's see what's in his report. What matters is what's in his report. Robert Mueller was a valorous officer in Vietnam. He was a federal judge. He was an FBI director under presidents both Republican and Democrat, the second longest serving FBI director.
Special counsel Robert Mueller wants President Trump to testify on the Russia investigation. What do you think of former President Obama maybe also being asked to testify? Should that happen?
Well, this is one of those issues where President Obama it would be in trouble in this situation because he came out publicly to the press and declared, I never asked my attorney general, I never asked my FBI directors, this was before these text messages, about ongoing investigations. And then we get these text messages between Strzok and Page, who we know were people that were on Mueller's team. Page was there temporarily. Strzok was removed because we believe these text messages came to light that showed their anti-Trump bias. We don't have to go through all of that right now. But then we've got new messages that show that Page was telling Strzok, you're preparing talking points for Director Comey to go and brief the president, that's President Obama, on everything we're doing. Now, in September, that time period, that could include the Clinton investigation, because we know that even though it was announced that it was done, they were starting to say, oh, wait, there's more emails, there's more information, we may have to reopen this investigation and then inform Congress. But there was also a Russia investigation. How much of that had to do with the Trump investigation? So to me, it's this. As a president, I think you're the commander-in-chief, you're the head of these executive agencies. You can ask questions about investigations, you can get information. But if you start declaring that you never do that or you're never going to get involved, that's where I think the president's team is already in this mode where they're using liberal advocacy groups to say, well, he was just getting information about the Russian interference in our election. And by the way, they never came forward with that information. And how much of that was politically related? So I think, again, these text messages are just a tip of the iceberg.
And I suspect there will be more text messages and more memos to come. So, okay, David Cay Johnston, author and investigative journalist, and Jordan Sekulow, thank you both for joining us.